Our guests today say universities in North America are under attack, whether that's academic freedom or from cuts that make universities more reliant on corporate interests. I'm Nicole Huck, and today on Blue Sky, we'll talk about the role universities are supposed to play in society and some of the things making that harder. We'll be joined by two University of Regina professors who edited a new book, Knowledge Under Siege, Charting a Future for Universities, and we want to hear from you. What role do you see universities playing in our society? You can call 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Well, Mark Spooner and James McNinch have spent a lot of time thinking about the role of universities. Their first book, Dissident Knowledge in Higher Education, was a platform for big thinkers to envision what universities could be. And this new book picks up where it left off, in an era where they say universities and academic freedom are under attack. Mark Spooner is a professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Regina. James McNinch is an emeritus professor and former dean of the Faculty of Education at the University of Regina. Mark and James, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thanks, Nicole. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for being here. So I'm curious, what made you want to put this book out now?
Well, of course, it's really been 2 years in the making. So publishing a book is not as instant as some media. But I think the challenge for us is that universities should be a stalwart of our own culture and society's belief in hope and a future. And those kinds of optimistic ideas are certainly under attack in this day and age. And we'll talk about that today.
Mark?
Yeah, I can say that when we were first writing the book, I thought we were being alarmist in terms of authoritarian states and what we were warning about. But since our initial writing time and publication time, things have gotten far worse. Throughout the United States, many areas of study are under attack. Those include equity, anything to do with equity, diversity, and inclusion, gender studies, critical race theory, post-colonial studies, cultural studies. All of those are under attack by right-wing governments who are really looking to narrow the field of what universities look at and what they do in society.
Do you have examples of some of the things that we've seen in places where this is happening?
Oh, sure. Florida, Texas, North Dakota, Iowa, Kansas, North Carolina. And
Alberta.
I was going to say, and to a certain degree, coming north to Alberta and Ontario. And it's really a narrowing of the imagination of what a university can do, and really a repurposing of the university to be only in the service of the labor market and industry rather than in the service of our collective, of our democratic society.
Do you have any colleagues in any of those institutions that you've been in contact with? Like, how has it been like to try to do the job that you're supposed to do under those kind of conditions?
Yeah, I know of several. I'm not close personal friends with these, but certainly academic colleagues that self-identify as members of the transsexual and transgender society have, in many instances, had to leave academia because they're no longer wanted, and universities there have been challenged to continue to get state and federal funding if they continue to hire transsexual and even gender fluid individuals. And that's, that kind of scapegoating is a very dangerous kind of attitude to take. And even in this province, we're still struggling with Bill 137 and how we work with transsexual and transgender children.
Their book title is Knowledge Under Siege. Under siege from who or from what?
I'd say that it'd be best characterized as knowledge is under siege by authoritarian right-wing governments who are really looking to, again, narrow the purpose of universities. One of the functions of a university is to, especially in a democratic society, in a democratic nation, is to provide the best available evidence upon which to base public policy, for instance. And so universities are a great thorn in the side of governments who are being ideological rather than basing stuff on science and facts. And so one of the things that happens to universities is their budgets get cut, they get silenced, and in the case of the United States, especially Texas and Florida, more and more censorship, where profs have to send their syllabus to the president's office to get approved before they're allowed to teach anything that deals with those subjects that I told you earlier about critical race theory, gender studies, any race, anything like that. Those need to be approved now and have to really fall under the strict line of the government. I mean, we haven't seen this kind of thing since McCarthyism and the communist scares of the 50s. This is really, I can't express it enough how alarming this is.
You know, I'm of the generation that marched in the streets in the 60s, and we fought for free higher education. We believed that we should model ourselves on European countries which offered free education and higher education. We marched for civil rights in comradeship with those in the States who were fighting for civil rights. We marched for First Nations and Métis people. And we really believed in a society where universities would help to make that change, to ask and answer the question, what kind of society do we want to live in? And that's the challenge for universities continuing today.
Is it only from authoritarian governments, or are we seeing just tough financial decisions having to be made by universities? Is it always ideological, or I don't know. Let me know.
Well,
how are these funding decisions made?
I think everything is political. And if you focus on the idea that a user must pay for the service rather than seeing universities as a service to the wider well-being of society, then it says, oh, well, you have to pay higher and higher tuition because you're going to benefit from this university, without recognizing that universities in their creation and dissemination of knowledge have a much broader task than simply preparing people for the professions and various elements of the workforce. You know, and in a dystopian view, you know, matrix kind of understanding of the worst society can be, we no longer need universities because technicians and artificial intelligence handle it all. And we're left to simply be spectators at violent sports and mad consumers. And universities are saying, no, we have to do much more than that. We have serious issues like climate change, just to say one, wars. We could go on forever about unjust wars, that universities have an obligation to society to stop and to improve and to change.
What do you believe is the fundamental role of a university?
I think that's an interesting question, because the role of a university in a democratic nation is different than one in, say, a dictatorship or a totalitarian regime. In a democratic nation, one of the things a university does, in addition to generating new knowledge, passing on knowledge to future generations, preparing people for the workforce, making products and innovations that lead to innovate new things in the marketplace. Another thing that it does is it helps to create participatory citizens able to participate in the democratic governance of its nation. And so we want to instill critical and creative thinkers, people who are able to understand how to oppose government decisions, to understand how they're made, where they have agency in their community and then in the larger society. So that's one part. And then the university itself is a pillar of democracy that joins the legislature, the judiciary, and the free press, and all in their aspirational ideals. But the university, again, as I was saying, their role is to critique government and to critique society itself. And sometimes that gets them in hot water. I mean, sometimes they're saying things that aren't popular. But their ultimate job is to speak truth to power and to bring the best available evidence to bear on public policy decisions. That's not always convenient for governments looking to make tax cuts, let's say, or be against vaccinations or things that we know saves lives.
James, you're talking about, marching in the 60s to maybe get rid of tuition. And I know we've had shows in recent years, this last year, with young people who are trying to make those decisions about what they do next out of school. And debt is such a big thing for people. The debt that you have to rack up when you go to university now for a lot of people is a real deterrent for
Absolutely.
folks. So how does even just the cost of going to university and knowing that you're going to graduate with potentially a big student loan, how does that affect who has access to the institution?
Well, again, you're talking about segments of the society that are privileged and others that are disadvantaged. Back in the day, in the 60s, I was able, over 4 months, working a variety of different jobs, car parking or working on the railway. I was able to make enough money in 4 months to pay my tuition and living expenses for the rest of the year. And that's impossible now. Mm-hmm. And so taking on of debt makes you, a critique would be that you come out of university with $60,000 worth of debt. You're now then an indentured servant in our society, paying off that debt, not having enough money to even get a mortgage together. And that's unfair, not just to individuals, but it's unfair to the well-being of and health of our society as a whole.
So what do we do about that?
Well, we can talk about it. Maybe the listeners have some good ideas.
If listeners have thoughts on today's topic, that number is 1-800-716-2221. They can email bluesky@cbc.ca. Mark Spooner.
Well, one of those things is to recognize the great economic engines that universities are, in terms of providing workers for the jobs that are out there, but also in terms of innovations and the health savings that happen. People who have a university degree, a university education, lead happier, more healthy lives. That saves money down the road in terms of healthcare costs, criminal justice. There are a number of savings that happen when people are able to study. And I always like to say that students are graduating with a mortgage on their house of knowledge. When they come out, they're already so in debt, which really redirects people away from a lot of areas of study that could be precisely the areas we need to study. Anything in the humanities, anything that helps us understand one another and understand difference and how to deal with difference in a peaceful manner. Those don't necessarily always lead directly to a job, but eventually they lead to employment. And they also prepare people for a gig economy where people may have to move from job to job because they're robust ways of thinking that then they're prepared for future learning in ways that the new jobs can train them, the specific things that they need, but they have the great framework, the foundation upon which to get retrained. And so they're not pigeonholed into one area of work. And I think that's really important that in the modern economy, people will probably get 7 to 9 jobs over their lifetime. And have multiple careers, and so you need to be flexible and able to adapt to jobs that we haven't even thought about that are sitting in the mind of some new freshman student at the university who's going to create a new whole industry that we haven't even thought about yet.
Universities are a place for exchange of ideas, and there's a lot of different perspectives that come out of universities. Last year, the MacDonald Institute put out a piece saying universities are facing a sharp decline in their public reputation. They say it's because of left-wing bias. And Peter McKinnon, who some Saskatchewan listeners will know as a former president of the University of Saskatchewan, wrote a piece in the National Post. And he claimed at that time that mandatory anti-racism and anti-oppression training for academic personnel is part of an ideological crusade within universities. And there's no room for participants who questioned what they were learning. So I guess this isn't the first time you're hearing about this. You were following this. What are your thoughts on this pushback from people like Peter McKinnon?
Well, I'm thinking of a quote that there's no view from nowhere, and everyone has a stance. And the idea that sometimes that people like McKinnon will posit is that there should be some kind of neutral or a value-free place in which you create and discover and make knowledge. And it's simply not the way in which that happens. That we all have a perspective, and we are shaped by how we have been raised, where we were raised, what we think we know. And that's truth means that, for example, there can be no reconciliation without truth and without understanding and learning and knowing about the past. We accept that in our systems, and we advocate for it in our schools and in our universities.
We got a question from Loretta, and she wrote, she would like the guest to share the distinction between transactional and relational approaches in right-wing politics and how that impacts universities. That's a toughie.
Well, I know that transactional means that I take if I get something back. So Trump is a great transactional make the deal, whereas something that's relational means that there is a reciprocity of an equality of perspective between two people. Certainly one of the biggest difficulties in contemporary education across the world is helping people to speak thoughtfully and respectfully about difference and about how they are different from other people and how yet we are all still the same. Teachers are challenged in the classroom and in lecture halls to make sure that civil discourse means that everyone's voice is heard.
Mark, do you have anything else to add to that?
I agree with that. That relational pieces take time and aren't based on a one-for-one exchange of, say, knowledge for money or something like in that order. But I'd also get back to Peter McKinnon that often when you're used to privilege, equality feels unfair. When you're used to privilege and now you're getting equality, it might feel that something's unfair. But I'd say that you're never on the wrong track when you're being more inclusive, and that people need to get used to that. And I think that old white guys sometimes have trouble with that. I know I'm one myself, but the more inclusive you can be, the better it is. That's an aim that we should strive for.
I want to go back to the Macdonald-Laurier Institute because they just put out a piece in February about what they say is discrimination because of race-based admissions in medical and law schools. They say academically stronger candidates, so people with better marks, are being passed over for people from preferred racial categories. And we're increasingly seeing this kind of pushback, so more so in Alberta, and I guess definitely through a lot of institutions in the United States. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, a counterexample of that is at Toronto Metropolitan University, which has opening up a medical college that is in fact targeting minorities who have not been represented in the medical field because of their disadvantaged positions. And we have lots of educational programs in this province. SUNTEP would be a good example of a native teacher education program for qualified Métis candidates who work on the idea that it will be equality of outcome, that the standards are not changed. It means that everyone is given a chance to reach the standards that are required.
And it just makes me think a little bit about even just what, like marks and how marks are evaluated, how people are evaluated. Mark, I know that that's something that you care a lot about is evaluation and how that's done in a more equitable way. Are marks the best way to judge whether someone is going to be a good doctor?
I don't think so, no. I think that marks are one indicator of what somebody knows, but there are many ways of showing what one knows, and probably work experiences and in situ internships and things like that are much better indicators of how someone will do on the job. And I think that it's important for people when they go to see a doctor or any other professional that they can see themselves represented in some of the people, that they have choice to see people who understand what they're going through or their own experiences. And I think that that's important, that people need to see themselves reflected in the jobs that are out there. And we've had a situation where that wasn't always the case. So we need to fix that. That's something that needs to be fixed, that everyone can see themselves reflected in the professional jobs that are out there in society.
My guests today are the editors of a new book put out by the University of Regina Press. It's called Knowledge Under Siege, Charting a Future for Universities. Mark Spooner is an education prof at the U of R. James McNinch is the former dean of the Faculty of Education at the U of R. And we're talking about the role universities play in our society and why these authors say they're under attack from both funding cuts and from anti-woke rhetoric spreading from the United States. If you have thoughts, you can call 1-800-716-2221 or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. We got an email from Keith who writes, the Nazi book burnings and persecution of academics transformed German universities into ideological strongholds. The Alberta provincial government and the current American administration have also tried to mess with educational institutions. Any ideological group should keep their hands off our universities. And that came to us from Keith. I do want to he's talking about Alberta, and I want to bring in another voice right now from Alberta. So the University of Alberta wants to axe its equity, diversity, and inclusion criteria from new hiring. If it's passed, the university would become the first in the country to walk back such a policy. This comes 1 year after the school's president said that they would move away from the EDI term, which is equity, diversity, and inclusion, since it's becoming polarizing. Alvin Nitbinyane is an assistant professor of journalism at MacEwan University. He's also a doctoral student focusing on social justice and inclusion in education. And I spoke to him earlier and asked him to explain what was happening on Alberta campuses.
Last year, 2025, we saw the University of Alberta, moving to eliminate the term, equity, diversity, and inclusion in favor of access, community, and belonging, which was a different thing. I think then the president said, the president of the University of Alberta said, EDI as a term, it was divisive. So they wanted something that is not divisive and all that. And then we saw Mount Royal University renaming his DEI Office of Community and Belonging, something similar to the University of Alberta. And then we saw University of Calgary now folding the DEI portfolio into Office of Institutional Commitments and all that. Yeah, so these are like the major things that we have seen quite recently.
So what's wrong with an Office of Community and Belonging?
There isn't nothing wrong with it, but if you look at the politics behind it, is that some people are now tired, if I may use the word, tired of DEI as a term. They're saying is divisive, but again, we are seeing here in Alberta is also U.S. politics encroaching into the province. You will see also you recognize that in the U.S. It's a big thing. There's been a big debate since the Trump era, since the Trump re-election or election last year, that there's been like a very sustained and systematic onslaught on the term DEI and also on DEI policies altogether. So I think we are seeing this happening also as well in Alberta.
So during consultations, the university reported hearing some of the staff and students concerned that EDI wasn't actually making a difference. What are your thoughts on that?
It's quite interesting because if you look at it from both sides, some are saying it's not working, but some are saying perhaps there should be another way of making it work. And basically, this is where we are at the moment. We have there was one research by PhD students at the University of Alberta to say EDI policies themselves have not worked for the minoritized communities at all. But they were saying the other way of really making it work is really strengthening it without really changing anything, without really changing the name, but strengthening it, making sure that it works for those who are racialized and minoritized in the university and all that. There are also those who are saying, well, it's divisive. We don't want it altogether. It's divisive. It's working against the dominant group and all that, in particular men, white men. And so you see two different camps, some saying it's not working for minoritized groups and they are supporting this with data, that ever since we have the DI offices, they are basically not really doing the job, but they should be given more teeth to do the job. But we have other groups saying, well, this is just an onslaught on the dominant culture, on white people and white men and all that. So these are like some of the biggest debates that we are seeing.
So that was Alvin Nipinyane, who's an assistant professor of journalism at MacEwan University, and he was describing, the shift away from the term DEI in some Alberta educational institutions. Mark, what do you make of these changes and why they're happening now?
Yeah, I think that an important piece here is that these changes haven't been made in a bubble, that the president of the University of Alberta had the changes approved by the UCP government in Alberta before he made them. Before Flanagan made those changes, they were approved by the government. So the government's playing an increasingly hands-on, micromanaging, sort of controlling role in areas that traditionally they didn't play. And so we're seeing partisan politics kind of creep into higher education institutions. And so I don't think that we can talk about this change being purely to be more effective when really it was a change that the president made in conjunction with, in collaboration with the government. And it's not only there, we're seeing it where the government in Alberta has also said that they want to control and censor the federal grants that individual researchers are getting at universities in Alberta. So there's the Tri-Council in Canada, which funds social sciences and humanities research, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, which funds medical research, and the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, which funds engineering and natural sciences. Well, traditionally, those funds are allocated through a strict peer review system, and I've been part of that system. I can say that it's really well done. It is neutral. The best projects are taken forward to get funding, and there are large committees formed by people all across Canada. And now what's happening in Alberta is really unprecedented, where the government's saying they will only approve the federal funds that have been given to individual researchers if they're in the best interests of Alberta.
And who gets to decide what's the best interest of Alberta?
Exactly. So you think about petroleum research and research that's looking at the negative effects of climate change and petroleum, for instance, or here it might be in Saskatchewan, it could be uranium or some other piece, pesticides, herbicides, things like that, where the government is now controlling what's being researched. Well, this is not too far of a step away from a fully authoritarian government telling us what we're allowed to teach, what we're allowed to research, what we're allowed to talk about. It's very alarming.
Yeah. We have a caller on the line. Jay is in Saskatoon. Jay, welcome to Blue Sky.
Hi, thanks for having me on. Yeah, this is a really interesting discussion today, and I guess I can maybe speak on a couple of fronts with regards to the topic today, and just following along from some of the previous comments on diversity, equity, and inclusion in current universities. This has been around the world that a lot of this has been moving forward, which I think on a whole is unquestionably a good thing. My perspective, having been in universities since the mid-90s and employed in Saskatchewan for the last 20 years, is a lot of the times the way these things actually get implemented don't feel great as employees. A lot of it's made to be performative. So we're required to attend sessions, and we're required to attest that we're going to uphold these policies. And there's no question of what our personal values are, or whether or not we personally believe in these things. And I personally do, but where I'm left frustrated is this performance aspect. And it has to be very visible. And if you don't declare yourself an ally or be acting out and trying to put a spotlight on what you're doing, you're automatically an other. You're someone who's not supporting. which isn't great. I also serve on some committees in the U.S. I'm a Canadian citizen, but I'm in a research position. Since the current administration took over in the U.S., anything tied to the U.S. Department of Energy, which is connected to some of the committees I'm on, had all of the DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion policies stricken, and we are not to even talk about it. And some of our colleagues who are trans, we weren't even sure if we would see them at future meetings. In those cases, the best we could do as committee members was to personally reaffirm for ourselves that we believed in these things as being important. But I could also appreciate not keeping the spotlight on DEI and distracting ourselves and reaffirming so much and just getting on with business. Because at the end of the day, we're still there to do a job, and we can still do that job while upholding those things that are important. The last thing that I would say with regards to universities under attack and strain on the university systems is I think there's been, in some areas of universities, I've been around for a while, the rot has set in. Some things are quite set in stone and not very flexible. One of the areas where I think universities are falling behind, particularly in research and development, are faculty who bring in large sums of money to the universities, which the universities absolutely rely on, especially our biggest universities. But a lot of those faculty are then not required to teach. They can buy out their teaching. So sessional lecturers come in. They're not particularly well compensated. It's not a good gig. And one might question whether or not our best and brightest minds that are bringing in huge amounts of money, being relieved of teaching, is that serving the best interests of our next generation of students coming through the system, that these innovators and juggernauts of research and discovery are sequestered and siloed so they can spend their time on their research? That's not everywhere. UVic, for example, I'm aware they have teaching requirements regardless of funding for some of their faculty. But yeah, there's issues abound, and I think lots of it over time has been a distraction away from the primary goals of universities, which is to raise the consciousness of students, to educate them, also to contribute to research endeavors and discovery. And I think putting a focus back on those core fundamental values doesn't take away from any of the other valuable things that we still want to support, but we need to focus on those primary pillars.
Well, Jay, it's a lot to unpack there, and I really appreciate you picking up the phone and calling in today. I'm excited to see what our guests have to say about some of the things that you brought up. Maybe just stay on the line, okay?
I definitely agree with the precariously employed. We're relying more and more at universities on sessionals and precariously employed staff to faculty to teach. And that's a way that the university's trying to make up for funding shortfalls, is by relying on a cheaper sessional employment. And they don't really have the same rights as tenured track and tenured professors in terms of job security, so they can't speak out in the same way. They can't take risks in the same way. They're great professors, they're great teachers, but they don't have the same job security and support that a tenure track person might have. And I think that that's definitely an issue. The estimate is that undergrad courses taught at Canadian universities is between 50 and 70% being taught by sessional faculty over tenure track and tenured faculty.
And what's the impact of that?
Well, like I was saying, they're much more precariously employed. They're going course by course, so they might just not be reemployed. If they say something that rocks the boat, they're not supported in terms of their research. They're only getting paid to teach, and they don't participate in the governance, the collegial governance structures that a traditional university is founded upon, where we try to manage what's happening at the university. None of those things can operate correctly because the person is just getting paid sort of one course at a time and can be let go at pretty much at any time, even though they're unionized. So it's a huge issue.
If I can add to a couple of things to what Jay had hinted at. This idea of performativity around diversity, equity, and inclusion is very dangerous, and it has to be not just performative, but followed by action. And I think what we're seeing with stresses on universities around funding, we see that principles are sometimes sacrificed to political pragmatism, economic pragmatism. And the war on diversity, equity, and inclusion is also a war on empathy. It's a war that you shouldn't be able to extend heartfelt understanding to a fellow human being. And that's the survival of the fittest as opposed to the survival of all of us. And another example of that very same principle is in Canada, this insistence that somehow there are 15 so-called super universities that are the major controllers of financial research funding, whereas an ideal is that all universities have something to contribute. And maybe Mark would want to say a little bit more about mid-sized universities like, for example, the University of Victoria, the University of Regina, have a comprehensive approach to teaching and learning and research.
I mean, to take that up, there is a push sometimes by what's called the U15, the big universities, to become strictly research universities and to have the rest of the universities feed those universities. So the smaller universities, the mid-sized ones like the University of Regina, would then be undergrad-only teaching schools that would then feed the elite sort of research schools. But what we've seen is that it's so important for a professor to be involved in research, to be involved in teaching and service. All three of those are fundamental parts of our job and make us better. So my teaching is informed by my research. Sometimes things that happen in the classroom inform my research. So it's a back and forth. And I think this book is a great example of where we're setting the national narrative about an important issue. Well, that's coming from the University of Regina. First, in a symposium we held where some of the most world-renowned scholars, from across the world came to Regina and also contributed to this book, which is just coming out. There's other events happening in Toronto. We're going to see a CBC Ideas and other pieces where the University of Regina, this mid-size university at the top of the Great Plains, is setting the national narrative and sometimes the international narrative. So it's so important for Canada to keep supporting its mid-sized universities and the way they contribute to the local community, the provincial conversations, and also our national and international ones. So I think that that's a very key aspect and one that we need to defend.
And Jay, are you still there?
Yes, I am. Yeah, and those are wonderful perspectives. I wish we could all be in the same room together and carry on the conversation.
Well, that's
further.
the nice thing about this show is that we can bring people together in different parts of the province. But I appreciate you calling in today, Jay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I want to talk about academic freedom because it's something I don't know if people fully understand it if they're outside of academia. We hear people on both sides of the political spectrum who have concerns about academic freedom. So, you might have concerns about cancel culture, woke universities, and then you might hear about programs that don't generate income, so they're seeing their funding cuts. Where would you say the state of academic freedom is we'll just stick to Saskatchewan, but Canada right now, and how does that compare with, 10 years ago?
Well, I think, let's just look at what is academic freedom.
Sure, let's start with that.
So let's start there. One, it's a tool. It's a tool for university professors to be able to do their job. So that means that in the classroom they can bring up topics that may not be popular, that may counter the prevalent narrative about, an issue. They might critique the oil industry, for instance, by saying that it leads to pollution, climate change. But they won't lose their job because they brought up those topics in the classroom or in their own research, that they're able to research what their peers have deemed to be important research. They're able to get funding, even though the topics may be counter to, say, Bill 137. They may look at the dangers of outing people who are transgender or who it may be counter to what the government's official line is. And then in terms of service, it's service to the university. They may oppose what an administration at a university is saying, that they want to bring in AI, for instance, that they want to be part of the new AI center. Well, some professors might speak out about the dangers of doing that they're, they take a lot of water, that they take a lot of power, that we don't know if AI is properly being restrained and controlled in the service of humanity. All of those things would be protected by academic freedom. What academic freedom isn't is academic freedom usually comes with tenure, and it doesn't mean you have a job for life. You can still be fired if you're not doing your work, if you're not showing up for class or teaching things that aren't about the course that you're supposedly teaching about. So if it's a math course, I can't be teaching about psychology or some other topic, that I have to be on topic and follow the course outline. But and it seems like it's a right and something that's so special to academics. But when you look at it in terms of a tool, it's really not uncommon at all. It's like police carry a gun. I don't normally carry a gun. I don't have a right to carry a gun. Police do, because they need that tool to do their work. Or farmers, for instance, here in Saskatchewan can buy large amounts of nitrogen that if I went to buy large amounts of nitrogen, I might be under suspicion of trying to build a bomb or something like that. Or doctors can prescribe drugs that are otherwise illegal. I mean, they can even cut you open with a knife. And because they need to. We recognize that that's a necessary thing. If you're a surgeon, I might have to do an operation. And there are countless other examples. Hockey players can fight on the ice and they don't go to prison. They get a penalty because these are tools for the job. And academic freedom's no different. Our job is to speak truth to power, to mine for truth in whatever way that comes out, and to speak about it and to put those truths up in concert with other truths. And so in that way, it's not uncommon at all to have specialized things. Journalists sometimes protect their sources. Members of the legislature, MLAs, and members of parliament can say whatever they want in the House, and it's not slanderous. As they step out,
you can't accuse someone of lying.
In the House, the Speaker will control that, but they can basically accuse someone of anything, and they can't be sued personally for what they say in the House. It's a privileged place.
James, what are your thoughts on that? Academic freedom.
Academic freedom is, to me, is yes, a tool, as Mark has nicely shown. But I think it's actually a matter of ethics. I think it's about being ethical in a public space. I think that the difference between a university and our homes, for example, is that we are conducting ourselves and must therefore be more accountable in a public space. And that public space is governed by certain values related to civility of discourse, and that discourse can be augmented and strengthened with the knowledge of academic freedom. That academic freedom gives us the right to explore things in many different ways and from many different perspectives.
I want to talk about university autonomy in just a second, but before that I want to give another word from Elvin Nitminyane, who is assistant professor of journalism at MacEwan University. And I asked him about your book, Knowledge Under Siege, and asked him what his thoughts are on the future of universities. Take a listen.
Universities should be free. Your professors should be free to do whatever they want to do to produce knowledge and all that. The other noise that you see from the others and from outside the university, it's okay. I think we live in a free society. Everyone can express their views, but it becomes a problem when the university now adopt the language from the political sphere to sort of now make life difficult for those who are in the university to produce knowledge. So that's my biggest concern. And I often say I understand the concerns of someone in Alberta or Saskatchewan who says, well, diversity language is too much. I understand them. I understand someone who say, well, as a white man, I may be targeted. I understand those concerns. And the reason I understand those concerns is that in most cases, these people do not have the data. In most cases, they do not have, the statistics. They do not have the theories about equality and equity and all that. I understand that. But the problem is when universities now adopt this language, when universities that, they have all the resources at their disposal, then they adopt the language of, what we have to do away with EDI, we have to do this, universities woke and all that. If the university adopts that language, then it becomes so problematic because they have all the resources and all the disposal and all that. The university itself, in my view, should be doing public education, should be educating those people who are, who in most cases sometimes they are ignorant of what is happening within the university and within the society itself. So I think that's the role of the university, to educate the public about what's happening instead of fueling these divisions and all that. Yeah.
So there's a lot there, but we only have about a minute left, which is the trickiest part right now. So I'm just curious, he ended with his thoughts on that role of universities, but I'd like to leave you each with like a last parting thought of what you want people to leave this conversation with today.
Well, I think universities are pillars of hope for freedom. And we talk about academic freedom, but we also talk about freedom to be in this world. And you see the relinquishment of human rights around the world now. Globally, we're just repeating our history again and again. We have to work against that.
Mark?
It's often said that universities are an ivory tower, and I'd like to challenge that by suggesting that actually we're in a tower, but it's a lighthouse. And it's our job to point out dangers, to keep people safe, to illuminate where the waters and rocks are dangerous. And that's our role in society, and we need to be able to play it out.
I appreciate this. You guys have a book, a book celebration coming up. So University of Regina professors Mark Spooner, James McNinch, they edited a new book published by the University of Regina Press. It's called Knowledge Under Siege, Charting a Future for Universities. There's a book celebration and signing happening at 5:30 tomorrow at Crave Kitchen and Bar in Regina. And I assume you want everybody out there?
Come on out.
Yeah, just go on the Eventbrite site, and so people know that you're coming, so there'll be enough food.
Awesome.